And here's the playful news we've mentioned. This is about a 17-year-old murder.
At the last minute, we learned that the coroner has now positively identified the Tindall remains found in the rural township of Rush County. Thank you.
This story happened in 2023 in a very small community in the United States. At first glance, like so many others that made headlines, this story might seem like just another case of a missing teenager. But I invite you to take a closer look at some details that turn the case of Valerie Tindall into something much bigger than a statistic. This is one of those stories full of little warning signs, like those Find the 7 Mistakes games, you know? Except here, each mistake was very costly. It cost a girl's life and destroyed an entire family. And it's exactly these signs that serve as a lesson for anyone who wants to protect their children, siblings, nephews, for example. I'm Marcos Campos. And if you're a fan of real stories with lots of details, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, become a member, leave a like, a comment, even if it's just an emoji, and that's it, messages delivered. Let's get to the facts. The story takes place in Arlington, in the state of Indiana, in the United States, a small town with just over 400 inhabitants. Something around 100, maybe 150 houses. In a place like that, literally everyone knows everyone, right? Or at least they think they do. They know the facade, what people let others see. And it was in this seemingly peaceful setting that Patrick Scott, a 59-year-old man, lived. He was married, already a grandfather to a teenage girl, a longtime resident of the city, a man seen as responsible, owner of a nice house, a family man. Patrick was also the owner of a gardening company during the summers. He used to hire local young people, which is pretty common in American culture, teenagers working there during the holidays to earn some extra cash. And in part-time jobs, like for example, babysitting, food delivery, maybe newspaper delivery, if that's still a thing, you know, that kind of work. And among these young people was the main character of today's episode, Valerie Tindall. Valerie was 17 years old and she had been working for Patrick for about 2 years more or less. Twice a week she would go to his company to do some part-time work. Their houses were less than 50 meters apart. They were neighbors, but according to reports, their relationship went much further than that. From boss and employee, you know, they were seen as friends. Valerie would have lunch, sometimes dinner with him. She would go on outings with Patrick's family. She used to go to his house. To the community, that seemed normal, especially because she was about the same age as Patrick's granddaughter, which, in the eyes of many, helped to normalize that closeness that, when told like this, already sounds a bit strange, doesn't it? Well, but later, after the crime came to light, investigators and prosecutors described Patrick as someone obsessed with the girl. That's right. At that moment, though, none of that seemed suspicious, quite the opposite. When, in June 2023, Valerie disappeared, Patrick was one of the first to show support. He talked to her parents, gave statements to the police, tried to reassure everyone. I think we've seen this story before, haven't we? He said that it must be just another case of a teenager who decided to run away on her own. Tired of the monotony of a small town where there's basically only a school, a post office, a cemetery, and not much else. He said that with conviction, like someone who really knew the girl's routine, and in fact he did. Well, according to the timeline, it was on June 7th, 2023 that Valerie Tindall left her house, telling her parents she was going to work for the neighbor, Mr. Scott. She left driving her own car and she was taking her cell phone with her. It was supposed to be just another ordinary day, but Valerie didn't come back home. Hours went by, night came, and her phone wasn't answering. The car wasn't found. No messages, no calls, nothing for her parents, Sheena and Jack Tindall. The desperation was immediate. Valerie, as I mentioned, was only 17, but to them, she was still a little girl, and there was no history that would indicate any reason for her to run away. She didn't have any serious problems at home, she had no history of disappearing, she didn't use drugs, she didn't drink, and as far as they knew, she didn't have a boyfriend. What was left then was that kind of nameless fear, an anguish, an emptiness actually full of possibilities. An accident, a kidnapping, an attack by a predator, everything and nothing at the same time, With no clues, the family reported the disappearance to the local police. 400 inhabitants. Okay, guys? So you can already draw a parallel about what the police department was like. In such a small town, the department was small too, but the case quickly drew attention, and police forces from other regions of the state started helping with the search. From the beginning, Senior Patrick Scott was interviewed as one of the main witnesses. After all, Valerie had said she was going to work for him that day. Patrick said that the girl didn't show up for work and that he didn't know where she was or where she could be. He also said that he was sure everything would work out, that she would be back home soon. At first, the story even seemed consistent, but during the interviews, the investigators started receiving different information. A co-worker of Valerie mentioned that on June 7th, she wanted to have lunch with Patrick. That information wasn't mentioned in any of his initial statements. When confronted again, Patrick started giving confusing versions about the last time he had seen Valerie. The times changed, the details didn't match, the stories contradicted each other. Little by little, he stopped being just a supportive witness and started being treated as a person of interest in that investigation. The analysis of Valerie's cell phone data showed that the last recorded activity happened shortly before 1 p.m. that day. The last known location was near Patrick's house, and as the days went by with no sign of the teenager, on June 10th, the Indiana State Police issued an alert for Valerie Tindall, spreading information about the case on highways, electronic billboards, and media throughout the state. Meanwhile, the family held on to any thread of hope, believing that, one way or another, Valerie could still be found alive. With the alert about her disappearance in effect and the investigation gaining statewide attention, Patrick Scott began to be listened to more closely. In one of the interrogations, he was formally informed of his rights, According to that Miranda law, in the United States, they have to tell you what's going on and all that, right? And among those rights is the right to remain silent, the right that anything he says can and probably will be used against him in a possible trial. And besides that, he also had the right to an attorney. At that moment, he wasn't under arrest yet, but he was already being treated as a suspect in the case. Patrick appeared calm and cooperative. He agreed to let the police examine his cell phone and handed over the device voluntarily. During the conversation, however, his stories kept changing. He said that on the day of the disappearance, he gave Valerie a ride from a spot near the school to somewhere close to his house. Actually, it was their houses since they lived so close, right? Then he said he saw the girl get into a light blue car that was being driven by a teenager he couldn't identify. But at another point in the same interrogation, when trying to describe that vehicle, Patrick mentioned the color orange or orangish, a strange detail. Because let's be honest, it's hard to confuse light blue with orange, isn't it? Later on, that detail would catch the investigators' attention, because orange was the color of Valerie's nail polish. The polish she was wearing on her nails the day she disappeared. The investigators also talked about the payments that Patrick made to the teenager. According to him, Valerie received between $120 and $150 per day of work in shifts that could last up to 12 hours. An amount considered high for a young person, but not completely out of the ordinary for gardening services there in the United States. While analyzing the cell phone and the statements, the police began to cross-check financial information. That's when they discovered that the day after Valerie disappeared, Patrick was at a Home Depot store in the city of Greenfield where he bought wood, slats, and panels. That store chain is a big warehouse that sells all kinds of things you can imagine, right? Maybe for someone with bad intentions, it's a real paradise. He claimed that the materials he bought there were for home renovations. Later, the investigation would discover that those items were used to build 2 wooden boxes, one larger and one smaller. Meanwhile, Valerie's family was waiting for answers. Each day was more distressing than the last. They had moved to that small town precisely in search of peace and safety, trying to give their daughter a life away from the dangers of big cities. In interviews, her mother, Chena, even mentioned that this choice was related to difficult events from Valerie's past. Although she never explained exactly what had happened to her, The irony, however, was cruel. The place chosen for protection because it seemed safe was now turning into the setting for one of the worst possible nightmares for them. Weeks turned into months, and the investigation moved forward slowly, gathering pieces of a very dark puzzle. During this period, more than 50 search warrants were executed in the Arlington area and its surroundings, several of them including Patrick Scott's property. Only in October 2023, about 4 months after the disappearance, did the police intensify the searches on this man's property on October 11th. Cadaver dogs trained to locate human remains were brought to Patrick's house. They indicated the presence of a decomposition odor in an area near a lake on the property. Searches were conducted in the water, but nothing was found. The next day, October 12th, drones began flying over the property and identified spots where the ground surface appeared altered, as if it had been disturbed. Even so, no conclusive excavation was carried out at that time. Only at the end of November, after new warrant requests, was a large operation set up. Thus, on November 27th, nearly 40 agents, including local and federal police officers, gathered to carry out court orders. There, at Patrick Scott's house and property, on November 28th, about 5 months after Valerie's disappearance, investigators finally found 2 wooden boxes buried in the backyard. When they opened the larger one, the agents immediately smelled decomposition. Inside, there was a female body in an advanced state of decomposition, wrapped in plastic and canvas, secured with duct tape. Despite the time, one detail was still visible: the orange nail polish, the same color that Valerie was seen wearing in photos posted on her social media. On June 7th, just a few hours before she disappeared, DNA identification confirmed what everyone feared. It was, in fact, Valerie Tindall. In light of the evidence, Patrick Scott ended up confessing to the crime. Tell us what you did to her. What did you strangle her with? A belt? He said that after killing the teenager, he kept the body hidden for about 24 hours in his office. Then he built the wooden boxes with the material he bought at Home Depot. He wrapped the body in plastic, put it inside the larger box, screwed it shut, and using a cart, he took it to the backyard, where he dug a hole and buried everything, covering it with dirt and construction debris. About the second box, Patrick only stated that it had already been buried since July and that he used it to store things. The police never officially clarified what was inside it or what it was used for. Searches with dogs did not locate the exact spot months earlier, possibly because the wind and the presence of an underground water table may have spread the odor across the land, thus confusing the indication of the exact location of the grave. There were also reports from neighbors saying that shortly after Valerie disappeared, Patrick had demolished and set fire to his garage during the early morning hours. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, a very strange episode raised many questions about what he was trying to destroy or hide at that moment. After the confession, the question that always comes up in cases like this remained, why? When investigators asked if Patrick Scott hated Valerie, he said he didn't. He said they got along well, went out together, went shopping, had lunch, and dined out. According to him, there was no planning, no premeditation. It just happened. It was, as the man tried to sum up. The version he gave to the police was the following, and it's important to make it clear here that this is the killer's narrative, not a proven fact, okay? Patrick stated that on Valerie's last day of life, after lunch, the two of them went together in his car, heading home. The young woman supposedly left her own car parked near the school and got a ride with him. Still according to Scott's account, inside the car, Valerie supposedly started taking off her clothes and making sexual advances toward him. He said the girl was trying to blackmail him and extort money because she wanted to buy a new car.
She tried to blackmail me into buying her a car. Right, and what happened? She thought she'd seduce me, but that wasn't happening. Things just got out of control.
In that supposed moment of desperation, he would have lost control, taken off his belt, and strangled the teenager to death. This narrative shifts the blame to the victim, which unfortunately isn't uncommon in crimes like this, with people like this. There is no evidence that Valerie harassed or threatened Patrick. What actually exists is an adult man in a position of power who maintained an intimate and completely inappropriate relationship with a teenage girl who worked for him. After the homicide, he said that he took the body to the office, where he kept it hidden for about 24 hours. As I mentioned next, he built that wooden box, wrapped the body in plastic, sealed everything with screws, and buried it there in the backyard. To erase the traces, like erasing the traces of a life, isn't it? 17 years? About Valerie's car, Patrick admitted that he removed it from the place where he had left it. He took it to an isolated area, removed the license plates, and threw both the plates and the keys into a lake, all with the aim of delaying the search and making it harder for the police to link the disappearance to him. The investigations also showed that Patrick used to give money to Valerie, in addition to paying her for the work she did. This raised even more suspicion that he was trying to buy the teenager's attention, possibly with intentions that went far beyond a professional relationship. Questions arose about control, possible messages, fake social media profiles, surveillance attempts, points that were never fully clarified in public. The trial, however, was held, and Patrick Scott was sentenced to 57 years in prison. The judge also ordered the payment of $10,000 in compensation to Valerie's family. In practice, this means he will die behind bars. For the family, however, there remained the irreparable pain and the devastating awareness that for 5 months their daughter's body was buried, less than 100 meters from where they slept, cried, and prayed for answers, without knowing that the truth was right there in the backyard of a man who presented himself as a friend. The most shocking thing about all this, I think, is precisely this man's conscience. If it even exists, because if it did, it wouldn't be possible to sleep. What this story exposes is that the links in this criminal chain already existed. The signs were all there. An adult man way too close to a teenage girl. Payments above normal, lunches, dinners, outings outside of work hours, an intimacy that should never have been seen as normal. Maybe a little suspicion, a little questioning. That internal warning was missing, the one that should go off when someone who's a little too helpful gets close to a minor, you know? Moving to a small town in search of safety doesn't eliminate the existence of predators, and that's the key point here. They're everywhere, and often they use exactly the appearance of a family man, an exemplary neighbor, a respectable citizen. In fact, that's the best disguise for these bastards, isn't it? And this kind of person even helps to defame those who are actually upright. Another important thing, social networks, right? Circles of acquaintances, workplaces. All of this needs to be closely watched, with attention, not out of paranoia, but real vigilance, because predators look for young, vulnerable, isolated victims who still can't tell when they're being manipulated. In Valerie Tindall's case, the signs were there, but unfortunately no one noticed in time. And this issue of manipulation goes way beyond just making the person do what the abuser wants, right? Many times they manage to manipulate to the point where the person actually thinks they're feeling something for them, when in reality they feel nothing besides the carnal, morbid desire to take advantage of a minor. Well, that was today's episode. I really appreciate your company. Kiss from Ruivo. Don't forget to like, comment, even if it's just an emoji, it's really important. If you can, become a member. Ruivo's Kiss. See you in the next episode.